Hello, Professor Davidson. My name is Morgan Crone, and I'm in your History 148th class, and this is my midterm video. I hope you give me a good grade. So, FDR's main priority during his presidency was to restructure American economy and society so he could hopefully end the Great Depression, since that's what they were in the middle of during his presidency, and hopefully prevent any depressions from happening again in the future. And then the Wagner Act was basically a law that gave employees a right to voice their opinions, or it allowed them to strike or complain basically to their employers if they weren't being compensated enough for overtime, or if they weren't being paid enough. It allowed them to gather in unions and to strike against their bosses. Since the Great Depression wasn't really a time of depression, it was mostly a time of panic for American society. FDR tried to calm this panic by doing regular broadcasts to the people to try to build intimate connections with them, and also he just was he tried to relate to the population a lot so that people could trust him. Or just tried passing as much legislation as he possibly could through the New Deal, and through several acts like the Social Security Act and everything like that, and acts that also little acts that helped with let's say the Soil Conservation Act, which helped during the Dust Bowl and stuff, even though it was kind of late because the Dust Bowl was already happening. But he enacted acts like the Social Security Act, which helped relieve a lot of that anxiety throughout the entire society, because people they basically had a safety net in case they didn't have a job anymore, or if they were retired. Some Latinos had a lot of confidence as minorities that FDR was not going to forget about them in the legislations that he enacted. The first times ever a president would be enacting laws that would be inclusive to almost everyone, because, gender wasn't really that equal at that time. But this just was a really good sign and a really good time for blacks and Latinos. Mrs. Perkins was the Secretary of Labor in 1933 for FDR, and basically she just helped type up a lot of the laws for minimum wage, and she was a workers' rights advocate, and she was the first female cabinet member in history. The Coalition of 1936 was basically an alliance in the society of European ethnic communities like French, Italians, some black communities, and women. But in general, just basically minority groups that hadn't been particularly involved in politics before the 1930s. This was just an alliance. These people kind of unionized. People that were leaving the Abraham Lincoln Party were African Americans, because they felt that the legislations that FDR was now enacting were filtering down to the black community, so there's no point of them staying with Abraham Lincoln. Not only was this FDR's work, but also through Eleanor Roosevelt's work, because she connected with the black communities a bit more than FDR and his advisors ever did. In the film, basically, Roosevelt's administration was labeled as proactive and hungry to lift the spirits of the American population. In the film, the big deal was that there was just a major power shift in American society. There were no longer corporations and employers that had all the power in America. It was basically giving employees a lot more power and a lot more voice into whether or not they were happy with their jobs and their pay and everything like that. The deal was just a combination of the New Deal, the welfare acts, and just the union actions by all of the workers and employees everywhere. Finally, some acts that were around and still are around today would be Fair Labor Standards Act. Was just how it sounds. It set standards for the workforce, like no child labor, minimum wage, compensation for working overtime, and everything like that. People tried editing it in 2014 and 2016 by trying to add or to raise the minimum wage to a couple bucks higher, but it was ultimately denied by a federal court. In 1935, FDR enacted this law called the Soil Conservation Act, and it basically just told farmers to not be so wasteful with their land, because it was causing this thing called the Dust Bowl, which everyone I think has heard about at one point. But the Dust Bowl was caused because people were over farming and being super wasteful with their land, and so this law just basically told people to chill out, don't overuse the land, because the Dust Bowl was happening. And then finally, the Social Security Act, which basically granted everyone who was retired or unemployed income monthly, so that way they still had income and they weren't just left with no income. Changes to this included in 1956 the law was changed, so it wasn't just people who were retired and unemployed, it was also people who were disabled that were receiving these monthly paychecks. And then in 1956, people of all races, religions, genders would receive these benefits as well. And in 1983, the retirement age was raised from 65 years old to 70 years old to receive the Social Security benefits. I'm really sorry for the bumpy ride in the car, but things are difficult, so I needed to record this in the car. I hope you understand. And yeah, that's my video. Thank you very much for listening. I tried my best.